The gold chain cut Phoebe Mercer's finger before anyone called her a thief. The pain was slight, no more than a bright sting beneath the edge of her nail, but the sight of blood on the torn link made the servants' hall fall silent. Lindcourt Hall, Hampshire, the 15th of October, 1858. Above stairs, a political house party glittered beneath chandeliers and spoke in lowered voices of Parliament, reform, and marriages that might strengthen old alliances. Below stairs, Phoebe stood beside the long deal table with a guest's torn cuff still draped across her wrist, while Mrs. Elspeth Rooke held the broken piece of gold chain between two gloved fingers as though it were proof of a hanging crime. It was in her apron pocket, the housekeeper said. No one looked at Phoebe directly. That was worse than accusation. It was judgment already completed. Phoebe pressed the injured finger against her palm and kept her shoulders straight. She had spent 6 years learning how to pass through rooms without disturbing the comfort of those born to command them. She knew when to lower her eyes, when to step back, when to let a lady forget the name of the woman fastening her gown. Yet invisibility offered no protection now. It had merely made her convenient. Mrs. Rooke laid the cut chain on the table. The late Duchess's watch locket is missing from the morning room. Miss Mercer was assigned there after dinner. "I was sent to mend Lady Mordaunt's cuff," Phoebe said. Her voice did not shake, though every face in the room seemed to wait for it to do so. "Mr. Pritchard can confirm the instruction." The butler stood near the door, grave and unreadable. "I can confirm that Miss Mercer was sent upstairs. I cannot confirm what occurred after she left my sight." A murmur moved among the maids. Phoebe heard the soft scrape of a shoe behind her. Nell Finch, the young scullery maid, had drawn closer to the wall. Fear had emptied the colour from her face. Mrs. Rooke turned toward Phoebe. "You were found with part of the chain. What explanation can there be? Only that someone put it there." A kitchen maid inhaled sharply. Mrs. Rooke's mouth tightened. "Take care. I am taking care," Phoebe replied. "That is why I will not confess to what I did not do." The door opened before the housekeeper could answer. Lady Adelaide Mordaunt entered in pale blue silk, her evening fan closed against one palm. She did not belong in the servants' hall. Her perfume arrived before she did, a cool scent of violet and amber that seemed designed to remind every woman below stairs of the distance between them. Her gaze moved from Mrs. Rooke to the chain, then settled upon Phoebe. "So it is true." Mrs. Rooke inclined her head. "A fragment was found upon her person, my lady." Adelaide looked almost sorrowful. The Duke's mother wore that locket every day. To steal from the dead is a particular kind of wickedness. Phoebe felt the words land through the room. Not merely thief, profaner, a woman without gratitude, loyalty, or soul. "I did not steal it, my lady." Adelaide's expression remained composed. "A servant caught with the chain denies the theft. How very unexpected." The cruelty was quiet. That made it more effective. No raised voice, no vulgar insult. Only rank giving shape to a conclusion others were expected to accept. "Search her room," Mrs. Rooke ordered, "and send for a footman." Phoebe's breath caught. A dismissal without a reference would mean more than losing Lindcourt. It would follow her from household to household, whispered at back entrances, before she could present a character. She could become unemployable by morning. Still, she would not plead with Lady Adelaide. She would not kneel before Mrs. Rooke. "You may search my room," she said. "You will find nothing that belongs to this house. Boldness is not innocence," Adelaide replied. "Nor is rank," Phoebe said before caution could silence her. Shock struck the room so completely that even the kitchen fire seemed to quiet. Adelaide's fan stopped against her palm. Mrs. Rook took one step forward. "You forget yourself." "No," Phoebe said. "I remember myself very well." The footman entered from the passage. Behind him came Benedict Somerley, 6th Duke of Norcombe. He wore black evening clothes, without ornament beyond a plain signet ring. He was taller than most men in the room, though height alone did not explain the stillness that followed him. His power lay in control. Nothing in his face moved without intention. Nothing in his household escaped the weight of his attention once he chose to give it. He looked first at Phoebe, then at the blood on her finger, then at the chain on the table. "What has happened?" Mrs. Rook answered at once. "Your Grace, the late Duchess's locket has been stolen. We found this in Mercer's apron." Benedict's eyes rested on the cut gold link. "And the locket?" "Not yet recovered." Lady Adelaide stepped nearer. "I fear there is little doubt. She had access, she has the chain, and she has behaved with extraordinary insolence." Phoebe waited for him to speak. He did not. His silence spread through the hall, heavy and exact. He studied Mrs. Rook. He studied Adelaide's closed fan. He studied the servants gathered near the walls. Phoebe understood then why men feared his quiet more than another man's anger. He was collecting something. She did not know what. The footman reached for her arm. Benedict lifted one hand. The gesture was small. The footman stopped at once. Still, the Duke said nothing. Hope rose in Phoebe and hurt her more than accusation had. She had believed, for one foolish instant, that his arrival would end it. Instead, he watched while her name remained on the floor between them. Mrs. Rook shifted beside the table. Adelaide turned slightly, opening her fan, as though the heat below stairs had become oppressive. In the polished face of a copper warming pan hanging beyond them, Phoebe saw the movement as a blurred reflection. Mrs. Rook's hand disappeared within the folds of her black skirt. It emerged, holding something small and gold. The housekeeper stepped close to Adelaide. Her fingers moved beneath the shelter of blue silk and painted ivory. The object vanished into the fold of the fan. Phoebe froze. Benedict's gaze had not moved from the warming pan. At last he spoke. "No." His voice was quiet, but it cut through every breath in the room. Adelaide looked toward him. Mrs. Rook went pale. Benedict crossed the distance between them. The thief has just changed hands. No one moved. Adelaide's fingers tightened around the fan. "I beg your pardon?" "Open it." "Your Grace, this is absurd." "Open the fan." The Marquess's daughter hesitated only once. Then she spread the painted leaves. The gold enamel watch locket slid from the fold and struck her palm. A collective breath passed through the servants' hall. Mrs. Rook recovered first. "My lady has done nothing. I recovered it from Mercer and placed it in Lady Adelaide's care." "You did no such thing," Phoebe said. "I never touched it." Adelaide lifted her chin. "Mrs. Rook brought it to me because she feared the servant might seize it again." Benedict took the locket from her hand. "Then Mrs. Rook may explain why she concealed the transfer." "I was protecting your mother's property," the housekeeper said. "By hiding it inside a fan?" His tone did not rise. It did not need to. He turned to Mr. Pritchard. "Close the doors. No one leaves until every account has been recorded." Then he looked at Phoebe. The room seemed to narrow around that gaze. "Miss Mercer will not be dismissed. Her wages, room, and position remain unchanged until this matter is resolved." Mrs. Rook opened her mouth. Benedict did not look at her. "That is not a request." Phoebe should have felt relief. Instead, she felt the sharp boundary of what he had and had not said. He had stopped them from taking her. He had exposed a lie. He had not declared her innocent. Benedict turned the locket over in his hand. It was oval, no larger than a plum, its gold surface painted with a spray of dark blue enamel flowers. He pressed the tiny catch. The case opened. Everyone waited. The late Duchess's watch should have answered with its soft, precise ticking. It made no sound at all. By 9 o'clock the following morning, the silence of the locket had become more troubling than the accusation. Benedict's study at Lindcourt Hall faced east, and pale October light lay across the escritoire, the locked dispatch box, and the small oval of gold enamel resting upon a square of black velvet. Mr. Pritchard stood near the door. Beside him waited Mrs. Bell, the senior still-room maid, present because Phoebe was a female servant, and because the Duke had ordered that no examination of the object occur without witnesses. Phoebe stood opposite the desk, with her injured right forefinger wrapped in a narrow strip of linen. The cut had stiffened during the night. Each time she bent the finger, a quiet pulse of pain reminded her that the chain fragment had been found upon her body, although it had never belonged there. Benedict entered, carrying the remaining length of the locket's chain in one hand and the cut fragment in the other. Both had been wrapped separately since the servants' hall inquiry. He placed them on the velvet without allowing them to touch. "Mr. Pritchard has recorded where each item was found," he said. "Mrs. Bell will witness what follows. Miss Mercer, I want you to tell me only what you know, not what you think I expect to hear." Phoebe looked at the locket. "Yes, Your Grace. You said last night that it should have been ticking." "It should." Benedict opened the case. The painted blue flowers caught the thin light, but inside there was only a shallow circular cavity, a ring of darkened metal, and 3 tiny screw holes. No movement, no hands, no beating heart of wheels and springs. Phoebe felt something inside her tighten. She had known the sound was missing. Seeing the emptiness was worse. Benedict watched her face. "You recognize this piece?" "My father repaired it 12 years ago." Mr. Pritchard glanced at her. Benedict did not. He continued to look only at Phoebe. "Your father was a watchmaker." "Yes, Thomas Mercer of Clerkenwell. He trained under a Swiss master before opening his own bench. He repaired watches for merchants, clergymen, and several noble households, though he rarely knew which owner belonged to which piece." Her voice softened despite her effort to keep it formal. "He knew this one." "How?" "The late Duchess came to his workshop herself." That drew the first visible reaction from Benedict. His hand stilled beside the velvet. "My mother went to Clerkenwell once, Your Grace. She disliked sending the locket through a jeweler because the watch had belonged to her own mother. My father said she trusted instruments more than titles. He admired her for that." Benedict lowered his gaze to the empty case. "That sounds like her." The words were quiet and not intended for the room, yet Phoebe heard them. For one brief moment, the Duke of Norcombe was not the highest-ranking man in the county. He was a son looking at the absence left by his mother. Then control returned to his face. "Can you tell when the movement was removed?" "Not precisely. I may be able to tell whether it was done recently." She reached for the brass loop hanging from a narrow cord beneath her collar. It had belonged to her father. The rim was worn smooth where his thumb had held it through 30 years of work. Phoebe hesitated before lifting it. She had never used it before a duke. Benedict noticed. "Is something wrong?" "No, Your Grace. I only need stronger light." He moved the lamp closer. He did not summon a servant to do it. He steadied the base while Phoebe bent over the locket. Through the loop, the inner ring enlarged into a landscape of scratches, old tarnish, and fresh wounds in the metal. She turned the case slightly. There, Benedict leaned nearer, though he did not touch her or the locket. What do you see? 3 marks around the retaining ring. The older scratches are dark at the edges. These are bright. She lifted her head. The movement was removed recently. Last night, possibly, within a few days at most. Mrs. Bell drew a careful breath. Mr. Pritchard's expression hardened. Benedict asked, "Could a person without training have done it?" A careless person with a small screwdriver might have forced it free, but the case would be more damaged. Whoever removed this understood the mechanism well enough to avoid bending the rim. Phoebe examined it again. There should also be a thin inner brace. It is gone with the movement. So the person did not merely take the watch apart in anger. No, they meant to preserve what they removed. Benedict looked toward the chain. And this? Phoebe set down the loop and reached for the remaining length. Before she could lift it, pain flashed through her bandaged finger. Her hand drew back. Benedict's gaze dropped to the linen. "The fragment cut you, only slightly. May I see it?" The question startled her more than the injury had. Men of his rank did not usually ask permission before inspecting damage to a servant. They gave orders and expected the body attached to the injury to obey. Phoebe held out her hand. "Yes, Your Grace." Benedict did not seize it. He turned her palm upward with 2 fingers placed lightly beneath her wrist, careful not to disturb the bandage. The contact was brief, deliberate, and restrained. Even so, Phoebe became aware of the warmth of his hand and the stillness of the room. "This linen has dried to the cut," he said. "It should be changed. It does not interfere with my work." That was not my question. His tone remained formal, but something gentler moved beneath it. He released her at once and looked to Mrs. Bell. "Please bring clean linen and warm water." Mrs. Bell left. Benedict returned his attention to the evidence. "Can you compare the cuts without handling the fragment?" Phoebe used the loop again. The severed ends were clean, with curved indentations on one side. This was not pulled apart. It was cut by narrow nippers with crescent jaws. "And the piece in your apron came from this chain?" "It appears so, but I would want both ends fitted together before stating it as certainty." "Then we shall state only what can be proved." The words should have reassured her. Instead, they reminded her of the difference between being protected from dismissal and being believed. Benedict must have read some part of thought in her expression. "You think I doubt you." Phoebe kept her eyes on the chain. "I think Your Grace has not decided what truth will cost." Mr. Pritchard became very still. Benedict did not rebuke her. "No," he said after a moment. "I have not. Honesty was not absolution, but it was more than she had expected." Mrs. Bell returned with a basin and fresh linen. Phoebe changed the bandage while the others looked away. When she finished, Benedict separated the evidence into 3 groups. The gold case went into one paper envelope. The remaining chain went into another. The fragment that had been planted in Phoebe's apron went into a third. Mr. Pritchard wrote the contents and time upon each fold. Mrs. Bell signed beneath his hand. Benedict sealed all 3 with dark green wax bearing the Sommelier crest, then placed them inside the dispatch box and turned the key. "The box remains in this study," he said. "The key remains with me." Phoebe watched him slip it into the inner pocket of his coat. "No item will be moved without a witness." "Thank you, Your Grace. Your wages, room, and position remain unchanged. No accusation is to be repeated as fact." He looked toward the closed dispatch box. Whoever arranged this expected the locket to be found. They wanted the chain upon you, and the case recovered soon enough to appear conclusive. But they did not expect anyone to open it, Phoebe said. Benedict met her eyes. No. The realization passed between them with the force of a door quietly locking. The theft was not the whole crime. The locket had been used as a shell, emptied of its true value, and returned to condemn her. Phoebe touched the brass loop at her collar. Somewhere beyond the study, a clock began striking 10. Its clear, measured notes faded into the corridors. She listened until the final beat died. Then memory stirred, not of the locket's appearance, but of its voice. "Your Grace," she said, "my father altered the sound of the movement when he repaired it." Benedict turned back. "Altered it how?" Phoebe looked at the sealed dispatch box. "Enough that I would know it if I heard it again." The breakfast room at Lindcourt Hall had been designed to make power appear effortless. Morning light rested on silver coffee pots, folded newspapers, and porcelain painted with green leaves. No voice rose above the gentle clink of china. No one needed to raise one. Rank carried farther than anger ever could. Phoebe stood behind the sideboard, with her right forefinger wrapped in fresh linen, pouring chocolate for Lady Adelaide Mordaunt, while every guest pretended not to notice her. The pretense did not protect her. It sharpened the humiliation. She could feel a tension moving over her uniform, her bandaged hand, and the straight line of her back. Lady Adelaide accepted the cup without looking at her. "Thank you," she said, then turned toward the Countess of Belgrave. His Grace was fortunate to recover the late Duchess's heirloom before the matter became uglier. Servants can be led into temptation by objects beyond their station. The Countess lowered her eyes with practiced sympathy. How distressing for the household. Phoebe kept the chocolate pot steady. The locket had been found in Adelaide's fan. The watch movement was missing. A fragment of chain had been planted in Phoebe's apron, yet before this table, Adelaide's version had already hardened into a truth elegant enough to be repeated. At the head of the table, Benedict Sommerlet set down his coffee cup. He had been reading a memorandum delivered from London, and until that moment his expression had revealed nothing. "No theft has been proved against Miss Mercer," he said. Conversation stopped. Adelaide turned toward him. "Surely, Benedict, the chain found upon her person cannot be ignored." "It has not been ignored." His voice remained even. "Neither has the manner in which the locket appeared in your fan." A faint colour entered Adelaide's cheeks. "Mrs. Rook recovered it and placed it in my care. I have already explained that. You have offered an explanation." Benedict folded the memorandum beside his plate. "You have not established it as fact." The Marquess of Cottersham watched his daughter with a stillness that was not concern but calculation. Beside him, Lord Conrad Mordaunt turned a spoon between his fingers. His breakfast remained untouched. Phoebe noticed the movement because Benedict had taught the room to be silent. "The distinction seems unnecessarily severe," Adelaide said. "A household cannot function if a servant's word is granted equal weight with that of a lady." Benedict looked at her fully. Truth does not acquire rank when it enters a drawing room. No one moved. Phoebe felt the sentence pass through her with dangerous warmth. It was not a declaration of innocence. She knew that. Benedict had chosen his words with care. Still, before titled guests and political allies, he had drawn a line around her name. The Countess of Belgrave reached for her tea and found the cup empty. Phoebe moved to fill it, grateful for the task because her face had become too warm. Benedict continued, "Until the inquiry is complete, No member of this household will repeat the accusation as fact. That instruction includes servants, guests, and any person who believes gossip becomes respectable when spoken softly. Conrad gave a short laugh. You cannot command the county, Norcombe. No, Benedict replied. Only my own house. We shall begin there. Phoebe looked down before he could see how much his words affected her. She had learned not to mistake protection for affection. A duke could defend a servant because disorder offended him. He could preserve her wages because injustice within his walls diminished his authority. Neither act required tenderness. Yet, when she lifted the chocolate pot again, Benedict's gaze fell briefly to the bandage on her finger. The glance lasted no more than a second. It was enough to remind her of his careful hand beneath her wrist in the study. Lady Adelaide saw it too. Her mouth tightened. Breakfast ended without further mention of the locket, but the silence around it had become another form of battle. Phoebe carried a tray into the service passage as the guests began dispersing. Through the half-open door behind her, she heard the Marquess say, "A word, Norcombe." She should have continued downstairs. Instead, the heaviness in his voice held her in place for one breath. "You are risking more than domestic harmony," Cottisham said. "The factory measure requires men who can bring the northern interests with them. I can bring them. I am aware. Then be equally aware that Adelaide's public humiliation will become mine. If you persist in treating her like an accused tradesman, our cooperation ends." Benedict answered after a pause. "If your cooperation depends upon my calling an unproved accusation true, it was never cooperation." Phoebe moved away before she could hear more. She had not intended to listen, and Benedict had not meant the words for her. Yet their meaning followed her down the servants' stairs. Her name had entered a contest involving Parliament, noble alliances, and interests far beyond Lindcourt Hall. It should have made her feel smaller. Instead, it frightened her because she understood what truth might cost him. By noon, Mr. Pritchard had cleared the stillroom for a formal reconstruction of the previous evening's duties. The butler sat at the end of a narrow table with the household roster before him. Phoebe stood opposite, her injured finger tender beneath the linen. Mrs. Rook had been ordered to remain away while statements were taken. That absence changed the servants more than any promise of protection. Without the housekeeper's black skirts in the doorway, they breathed more freely, though not freely enough. "Begin after dinner," Mr. Pritchard said. Phoebe folded her hands. "I was assigned to the west guest corridor. At 8:40, Mrs. Rook called me back and said Lady Mordaunt's cuff had torn. Was the request sent by Lady Mordaunt? I assumed it was. Did Mrs. Rook say so?" Phoebe considered. She said, "Her ladyship requires you in the morning room." Mr. Pritchard made a note. "The morning room is not used for dressing." "No. Why did that not strike you as unusual?" "Because houseguests often leave wraps, gloves, or sewing there before dinner." Mrs. Rook spoke as if the matter had already been decided. The butler turned to the roster. "You were not originally assigned to the morning room at all." "No." He traced one line with his finger. "Miss Avery was." Sarah Avery, a senior housemaid, stood near the shelves of preserves. She looked confused. "Mrs. Rook sent me to the east bedroom, sir," she said. "Mercer had been requested above." Phoebe felt the first cold movement of certainty. Her presence near the cabinet had not been chance. Someone had shifted 2 servants to place her exactly where the accusation required. Mr. Pritchard questioned the footman who had carried wine, the maid who had turned down the guest beds, and the hall boy who had tended the lamps. Their answers gave Phoebe no thief, only a corridor of small opportunities. Mrs. Rook had moved through all of them without question. She possessed keys, authority, and the habit of being obeyed. Near the door, Nell Finch stood with a basket of folded cloths pressed to her chest. She had no reason to be in the still room. Phoebe noticed that first. Then she noticed the girl's eyes. They kept returning to Mr. Pritchard's list whenever he mentioned scissors, cutters, or tools used below stairs. "Nell," Phoebe said gently, "did Mrs. Rook send you here?" The girl shook her head too quickly. "No, miss. Mrs. Bell asked for these cloths." "Then leave them on the shelf," Nell obeyed. But when she turned, the basket caught against the table. The folded cloths slipped. Phoebe bent to help her, careful of her injured hand. Nell's fingers trembled as they gathered the linen. "You are not in trouble," Phoebe said quietly. The girl looked toward Miss Pritchard, then toward the door. "I don't know anything." Phoebe could have pressed her. The accusation against her had already crossed from servants' hall to breakfast table. Every hour of silence gave Adelaide more time to shape the story. Yet fear had made Nell nearly breathless, and Phoebe knew too well what happened when a powerful household demanded words from someone with nowhere else to go. She placed the last cloth into the basket. "Then no one will force you to speak before you are ready." Mr. Pritchard glanced at Phoebe, but did not interfere. Nell stared at her as if kindness were a language she had forgotten. Phoebe rose. "You may go." The girl reached the door, stopped, and looked back. Her face was pale. "Miss Mercer?" Phoebe waited. Nell lowered her voice until the words barely crossed the room. "After midnight, I saw Mrs. Rook by the silver cupboard. Her grip tightened on the basket. She was carrying blue steel nippers. Mrs. Elspeth Rook offered Phoebe mercy on the morning of the 19th October, and the offer was shaped so carefully that only a woman accustomed to humiliation would have recognized the threat inside it. The housekeeper summoned her to the linen room before the first bell for breakfast. Shelves of folded sheets rose on every side, white and orderly, while rain tapped against the narrow window. Phoebe's right forefinger no longer throbbed beneath its bandage, though the cut remained tender whenever she bent it. Mrs. Rook stood beside the inventory desk with a sealed letter and a small purse laid before her. "You have caused sufficient disorder," she said. "His Grace has allowed this matter to become more public than it need be, but there is still a sensible conclusion available." Phoebe looked at the purse. "What conclusion is that?" "You will leave Lindcourt before the house party ends. I will provide a modest reference stating that you resigned because of a family obligation. Your wages will be paid through the quarter. And the accusation?" Mrs. Rook smoothed one cuff. "No respectable household discusses every unfortunate suspicion in a servant's history. That is not an answer. It is the only answer you require." Phoebe understood the design at once. If she left quietly, Lady Adelaide's account would harden into certainty. A guilty maid had been discovered and removed. No one would need to say she had confessed. Her departure would confess for her. The purse on the desk was not generosity. It was the price of becoming invisible. Mrs. Rook pushed the reference toward her. "Take it. You may still find a place somewhere less exacting." Phoebe did not touch the paper. "Did Lady Adelaide ask you to offer this?" A small pause betrayed the housekeeper before her expression closed. "You forget the distance between your position and hers." "No. That distance is why you expect me to accept disgrace as kindness." Mrs. Rook's eyes sharpened. "Do not mistake the Duke's temporary interest for protection. Gentleman of his rank tire quickly of household disturbances. When he does, you will be left with no reference at all. Fear moved through Phoebe, cold and immediate. Mrs. Rook had authority over female servants in one of the finest houses in Hampshire. A word from her could close doors from London to Bath. Phoebe saw the future being offered to her. A lesser household, lower wages, suspicion following each new application, perhaps no place at all. She also saw the alternative. To leave now would spare her daily whispers, but it would surrender her name to the people who had used it. Phoebe drew a slow breath. I will remain until the truth is visible. You are in no position to make demands. I am not making one. I am refusing yours. She placed the sealed reference back at the center of the desk, though she had never lifted it. You may dismiss me openly, Mrs. Rook. You may state before Mr. Pritchard and his grace that you are dismissing an accused servant while evidence remains secured in the Duke's study. But I will not walk away and allow my departure to be called a confession. Color rose beneath the housekeeper's severe composure. You have become remarkably bold. No, I have become impossible to frighten quietly. Mrs. Rook closed her fingers around the purse. Then you will discover what public disgrace costs. Phoebe met her gaze. I have already begun paying for it. She left before the housekeeper could answer. Her knees weakened only after the door closed behind her. But she did not stop. She walked the length of the passage with her head upright, past two maids who suddenly found reason to study the floor, and entered the still-room where Mr. Pritchard waited with Nell Finch. The scullery maid stood side the work-table, both hands clenched in her apron. Benedict had ordered that every statement be witnessed by the butler. Phoebe had insisted upon it as well. No frightened servant would be left alone with someone who could later reshape her words. Mr. Pritchard indicated a chair. Nell has asked to speak. Only if she chooses, Phoebe said. Nell looked at her with gratitude and terror mixed together. I saw Mrs. Rook after midnight, like I told you. Where were you? Mr. Pritchard asked. Coming from the scullery, sir. Cook had me take salt to the back pantry. The lamp by the silver cupboard was lit. Who else was present? No one I saw. What was Mrs. Rook doing? Nell swallowed. She had blue steel nippers in her hand, small ones. She put them into her pocket when she heard me. Did you see a chain? Phoebe asked. Nell shook her head. No, miss. I don't want to say what I didn't see. That is right. Phoebe's answer came at once. Tell only what you know. The girl's shoulders eased by a fraction. Mr. Pritchard wrote each statement carefully, then read it back without changing a word. Nell confirmed it and made a trembling mark beneath his notation. A knock sounded. Benedict entered, followed by Mrs. Bell. He did not ask Nell to repeat herself. He read the written account, then looked toward the girl. Mrs. Rook will not question you about this statement. If she attempts to do so, you will report directly to Mr. Pritchard. Nell stared at him. Yes, Your Grace. Your wages and position will not be altered because you spoke. The girl curtsied so quickly she nearly stumbled. Mrs. Bell led her out, leaving Phoebe, Benedict, and the butler beside the table. On a folded cloth lay the blue steel nippers Mr. Pritchard had retrieved from the housekeeper's work-basket under Benedict's authority. Phoebe did not touch them. The chain fragment remained sealed inside the dispatch box in the Duke's study, and she would not risk confusing possession or evidence. Instead, she bent near the tool and used her father's loop. The jaws were narrow and curved inward. Along one edge, a tiny nick interrupted the steel. These are crescent jaws, she said. The fragment in my apron bore curved impressions on one side. Benedict watched her. Can you say these nippers cut it? Not without comparing them directly to the sealed chain. I can say, the shape is consistent. Nothing more. Nothing more honestly. Something like approval entered his expression. Then that is what will be recorded. Mr. Pritchard added the observation beneath Nell's statement. Benedict remained near the window, while the butler carried the nippers away to be wrapped and secured separately. When the door closed, he turned to Phoebe. Mrs. Rook spoke with you this morning. It was not a question. She offered me a reference and wages if I left before the house party ended. His face went still in the particular way that meant anger had been contained rather than absent. You refused. Yes, you should have informed Pritchard before confronting her. Phoebe felt the old imbalance rise between them, so that I might be protected from answering a threat made to my own name. Benedict paused. The correction landed. That was poorly said. It was honestly said. Then allow me to answer honestly. I do not want you sleeping under the authority of a woman now connected to the evidence against you. He gestured toward the upper floors. There is a room on the guest corridor near Mrs. Bell. You may be moved there today. Phoebe understood the practical wisdom. She also saw what the guests would see. A maid transferred above stairs under the Duke's personal protection. Lady Adelaide would not need to invent scandal. Society would supply it. No, Your Grace. Miss Mercer, if I am hidden on the guest floor, they will say I have become your private favorite. Every word I give will be weighed against that suspicion. Your safety matters more than gossip. My safety cannot require me to surrender my credibility. His jaw tightened, but he did not command her. Where would you remain? In my present room? Mrs. Bell may hold the key while I am on duty. Mr. Pritchard may witness any search or inquiry. I will not meet Mrs. Rook alone again. Benedict considered each condition. Agreed. The word carried no resentment. That surprised her. Nell will report through Pritchard until this is settled. Mrs. Rook will have no authority to dismiss or punish her. Thank you. You are not thanking me for obedience, I hope. Phoebe looked at him. No, Your Grace, for listening. The silence between them changed. It did not become intimate, not yet. It became equal enough for truth to stand inside it. Benedict's gaze dropped briefly to the healing bandage on her right hand, then returned to her face. There is something else I require from you. Phoebe waited. Tell me everything you remember about my mother's watch. On the morning of the 22nd October, the morning room at Lindcourt Hall stood exactly as the late Duchess had left it. The curtains were pale green silk. The escritoire faced the eastern windows, and a shallow silver dish still held 3 dried lavender heads that no servant had been permitted to discard. Benedict had ordered the room opened for the inquiry. But the door remained wide, and Mrs. Bell sat near it with a basket of mending upon her lap. Phoebe understood the arrangement. They would speak privately enough for truth, yet not privately enough for gossip. Her right forefinger had healed to a small scab. The bandage was no longer necessary, though she still avoided bending it sharply. Benedict stood beside the cabinet from which the locket had disappeared. The cabinet key lay on the table between them, placed there by Mr. Pritchard and recorded before the butler withdrew. The gold case itself remained sealed in the dispatch box in the Duke's study. Nothing had been moved. Nothing had been examined without witness. You asked me to tell you what I remember, Phoebe said. Benedict inclined his head. Everything, even what appears insignificant. She touched the brass loop hanging beneath her collar more from habit than need. My father said a watch reveals its keeper by the injuries it carries. A deep scratch near the bow suggests impatience. Tarnish beneath the hinge suggests damp. Damage near the winding square suggests someone forced it after it resisted. And my mother's locket. It had been cared for. Phoebe moved toward the cabinet, but did not touch it. The enamel was already worn at the edges when she brought it to my father. She carried it in her hand rather than inside a case. He told me she refused to leave the workshop until he opened it before her. A faint change crossed Benedict's face. That also sounds like her. She watched every tool he used, not because she mistrusted him, because she wanted to understand. Phoebe looked toward the empty chair beside the fireplace. My father admired that. Most titled customers sent a servant, expected the mechanism returned without explanation. My mother did not accept ignorance as refinement. His voice held warmth now, restrained but unmistakable. She believed knowing how a thing worked was a form of respect. Phoebe met his eyes. My father believed the same. For a moment, rank receded, not vanished, never that. Yet the room held a watchmaker's daughter and a duke as two people joined by the memory of those they had lost. Benedict moved to the writing table and lifted a lamp so that its light fell more clearly across the cabinet. You said the movement had a mark, a swallow. Where? On the balance bridge, very small. My father engraved it after the repair. Why? Phoebe smiled before she could stop herself. Because he had promised himself never to mark a customer's work. Then the Duchess asked how she would know the same mechanism had been returned. Benedict's mouth almost curved, and he broke his rule for her. He said rules that cannot survive an honest question are vanity. Mrs. Bell lowered her eyes to her sewing, but Phoebe saw the older woman's shoulders soften. Benedict set the lamp down. Would the engraving still be visible? Yes, if the bridge has not been replaced. It would sit beneath the upper plate, near the balance cock. A person would need to open the watch to see it. Then the swallow cannot help us identify the movement while it remains hidden, not by sight. Phoebe drew the loop from beneath her collar, but perhaps by sound. Benedict waited. She continued. The watch had a quarter chime. The Duchess complained that it struck too sharply at night, especially the fourth beat. My father altered the sequence. He softened the final hammer and delayed it by the smallest fraction. Enough to hear, if one knew the sound. You know it. I heard him test it for 3 days. The memory came with painful clarity. Her father bent over his bench beneath the workshop lamp. The tiny movement sang within its brass cradle, 3 notes in order, then a 4th that arrived half a breath late. He had smiled when Phoebe recognized the difference from the back room. She had been 16 and certain he would live forever. I would know it again, she said. Benedict regarded her with a seriousness that made the room seem smaller. Then you are no longer merely a witness to the accusation. You are a technical witness to the missing mechanism. Phoebe lowered the loop. Lady Adelaide will say a servant's memory is convenient. Lady Adelaide may say what she chooses. She will not determine what is recorded. Footsteps approached in the corridor. Mr. Pritchard appeared at the open door with a folded note. He glanced toward Mrs. Bell, then to Phoebe. Your Grace, Lady Adelaide requests that Miss Mercer be removed from duty above stairs. Her ladyship claims Miss Mercer's presence causes distress among the guests. Benedict did not take the note. On what authority? Mrs. Rook conveyed the request as a household necessity. Phoebe felt the familiar pressure settle against her ribs. The attempt had changed shape. First a private dismissal, now removal under the appearance of decorum. Benedict's expression became still. Miss Mercer remains assigned according to Pritchard's direction. Mrs. Rook has no authority to alter her duties while she is connected to evidence in this inquiry. Yes, Your Grace, and Lady Adelaide may address any concern to me directly, Mr. Pritchard bowed and withdrew. Phoebe looked at Benedict. You have made my presence a challenge to her. She made your absence a condition of her comfort. That distinction may not matter to the guests. It matters to me. The words came too quickly to be strategic. Silence followed. Benedict seemed to hear their weight only after they were spoken. Phoebe felt the air change between them. She should have stepped back. Instead, she moved toward the lamp, intending to show him how the loop narrowed the field of view. Hold it closer to the light, she said, not to your eye at first. He extended his hand. She placed the brass loop in his palm. His fingers closed around it carefully, as though he understood that the object carried more than metal. Your father used this every day, and now you do. When I need to see what others overlook, Benedict lifted it, but at the wrong angle. Phoebe reached to adjust his hand. Her fingers touched his. Neither withdrew. The contact was slight, no more than the meeting of fingertips beside a worn brass rim, yet it held a stillness unlike any accidental brush. Benedict's gaze moved from the loop to her face. Phoebe became aware of Mrs. Bell near the door, the lamp between them, the open corridor beyond. She was also aware that Benedict did not claim the moment by rank or pressure. He waited. Phoebe turned the loop a fraction in his hand. There, she said softly. Now the light will fall through it. I see. His voice had lowered. He examined the brass edge, then looked through the lens toward the empty cabinet lock. It makes the smallest damage impossible to ignore. That is its purpose. He lowered it and returned it directly to her open palm. His fingers rested against hers for one heartbeat before releasing. The gesture was deliberate. So was the return. Phoebe slipped the loop beneath her collar, unsettled by how much the care of that small action affected her. Benedict turned toward the late Duchess's chair. My father was ill for nearly 2 years before he died. During the last winter, my mother sat here after midnight and wound the locket whenever she believed no one was watching. He touched the chair back. I heard it through the wall of the adjoining study. 4 notes every quarter hour. She said the sound kept her from imagining time had stopped. Phoebe said nothing. There were griefs too private for comfort, offered too quickly. Benedict continued. After she died, I ordered the room preserved. I told myself it was respect. He looked toward the dried lavender and the untouched escritoire. In truth, I feared that moving anything would feel like losing her twice. Phoebe's chest tightened. Keeping a room unchanged cannot keep grief from changing us. No. He looked at her then. You learned that sooner than I did. Before she could answer, Mr. Pritchard returned, this time carrying a sealed card upon a silver tray. Your Grace, the Marquess of Cottisham requests an immediate meeting. Benedict broke the seal and read the brief message. The warmth left his face, replaced by the controlled severity Phoebe had first seen in the servants' hall. He says his support in the Lords will be withdrawn unless the inquiry ends before the county bazaar. Phoebe understood the choice before Benedict spoke it aloud. The missing movement, the planted chain, and her damaged name had become pieces on a political board. Benedict folded the message once. Then we must discover what the truth costs before someone decides. It is too expensive to keep. By the morning of the 25 October, the inquiry had acquired the dangerous stillness of a door held shut against a storm. Nothing had been resolved. The sealed locket case, The remaining chain and the planted fragment remained inside Benedict's locked dispatch box. Mrs. Rook's blue steel nippers had been wrapped and secured separately under Mr. Pritchard's supervision. Nell Finch had not withdrawn her statement, though she now moved through the lower passages with the frightened care of someone who expected punishment to arrive from an unseen direction. Phoebe's right forefinger had healed to a faint red line, but her name remained wounded before the household. Benedict sent for her after breakfast. He received her in the estate office rather than the morning room, with the door open and Mrs. Bell seated at a small writing desk nearby. Maps of tenant farms covered one wall. On another stood shelves of parliamentary papers bound in dark leather. Phoebe had never entered the room before. It was a place built for decisions whose consequences reached far beyond the people making them. Benedict stood beside the cold fireplace with the Marquess of Cottersham's letter in his hand. "The measure before the Lords concerns factory conditions," he said. "Hours for children, ventilation, and the inspection of dangerous machinery." Phoebe looked toward the shelves, and Lord Cottersham can influence the vote. He can bring several northern peers with him. Without them, the bill may fail before it reaches amendment. Benedict folded the letter. He has made his continued support conditional upon ending the inquiry before the charity bazaar. Ending it how? He has not written the word guilty. He does not need to. Benedict's gaze met hers. No. The admission carried no defense. Phoebe appreciated that, though it did not lessen the unease inside her. Then the price of his support is my silence. The price he proposes is uncertainty. He wants the matter contained until the house party disperses. "Contained where?" she asked. "In the servants' hall, in my reference, in the next household that hears I left Lindcourt under suspicion." Benedict's jaw tightened. "I will not dismiss you. That is not the same as clearing me." "I know." He moved toward the table, placing Cottersham's letter beside a stack of memoranda. "Truth must be proved before I destroy an alliance capable of protecting children who will never know my name." Phoebe understood the force of that duty. That made the pain sharper, not smaller. A selfish man would have been easier to condemn. Benedict was measuring one injustice against hundreds of others, and trying to believe the scale made him impartial. "Caution is reasonable," she said, "but it stops being neutral when I am the person required to bear its cost." His expression changed slightly. "You believe I am asking you to suffer for the bill. I believe you are telling yourself that waiting harms no one." Mrs. Basil Penn paused, though she kept her eyes lowered. Benedict did not rebuke Phoebe. He looked past her toward the open door, as if testing her words against every corridor beyond it. "I have spent most of my life believing delay is preferable to error," he said. "In politics, a badly timed truth can destroy the chance of reform. And in a household, it can destroy a name." The answer came quietly. Phoebe felt something in him yield, though not enough. Not yet. Benedict reached for the bell. "A carriage will leave for the village at 11. The watchmaker there repaired several estate clocks under my mother's direction. He may remember the locket or anyone who asked recently about small movements. You want me to go? Your knowledge is the reason for the visit." He hesitated, then added, "Mrs. Bell will accompany us." Phoebe inclined her head. "Very well, Your Grace." The conversation had not resolved the distance between them. It had only made that distance honest. At 11:15, Phoebe crossed the carriage court, wearing her plain grey cloak over her uniform. Mrs. Bell had gone inside to retrieve a warmer shawl. The head coachman Mr. Hale stood near the horses, checking a leather trace. 2 grooms moved at the far end of the yard. Phoebe had nearly reached the carriage when Lord Conrad Mordaunt stepped from beneath the covered archway. He wore a dark green coat and carried his gloves in one hand. A heavy gold pocket watch hung from his waistcoat chain, half concealed beneath the fold of his coat. "Miss Mercer," he said. "A word." Phoebe stopped, but she did not move closer. "I am expected in the carriage, my lord." "Then I shall be brief." He glanced toward Mr. Hale, who had turned his back to inspect the near horse. Conrad lowered his voice. "This affair has grown tiresome. My sister is distressed. His Grace is distracted. The servants are frightened. No one benefits from your determination to make a spectacle of yourself. I did not place the locket in Lady Adelaide's fan. No one is asking you to say you did. You are asking me to leave before the truth is known." A faint smile appeared. "I am asking you to recognize opportunity." He drew a folded bank draft from inside his coat. £200. Enough to establish yourself comfortably in another county. You will also receive a reference from a household of consequence. Phoebe stared at the paper, then at him. £200 exceeded several years of her wages. It could secure her aunt's rent. It could buy a small business. It could create the kind of safety women in service rarely possessed. Conrad knew exactly what he was offering. That knowledge made the insult worse. And what must I say in return? Nothing. Silence is often the most respectable answer. Respectable for whom? His smile faded. Do not be foolish. You have already been fortunate. Norcom's interest has protected you from dismissal. His Grace's interest did not put the chain in my apron. No, but it may encourage people to believe other things. The threat was soft, almost courteous. Phoebe felt it clearly. If she refused, they would turn Benedict's attention into scandal and her defense into ambition. "Keep your money," she said, "and your reference." Conrad's fingers closed around the draft. "You may regret pride when no decent house will employ you. Perhaps, but I would regret selling my own name more." She stepped past him. Conrad moved as if to block her, then checked himself when Mr. Hale turned from the horses. The coachman's eyes moved from Phoebe to the bank draft in Conrad's hand. Conrad folded it quickly and slipped it back into his coat. As he did, the heavy pocket watch swung free. His hand closed around it with an instinctive force that drew Phoebe's attention. He looked down at the watch, then tucked it sharply beneath his waistcoat. "Miss Mercer," he said with brittle politeness, "I hope the village air improves your judgment." Phoebe did not answer. Mrs. Bell returned, and Benedict emerged from the side entrance a moment later. Mr. Hale opened the carriage door. Phoebe climbed inside without looking back, though she knew the coachman had witnessed enough to remember the exchange. The road to the village ran between damp hedgerows and fields stripped nearly bare after harvest. Mrs. Bell sat opposite. Benedict took the forward-facing seat beside Phoebe, leaving a proper distance between them. For the first mile, the carriage held only the creak of leather and the measured beat of hooves. "Conrad spoke with you," Benedict said at last. Phoebe looked toward Mrs. Bell before answering. "He offered me £200 and a superior reference if I left." Benedict became very still. "Did he threaten you?" "He said no decent household would employ me if I continued." Mr. Hale saw the exchange. The end of it. He saw the paper in Lord Conrad's hand. Benedict's gaze hardened. "Conrad will not approach you alone again. You cannot prevent every corridor, no, but I can make the consequence clear." Phoebe turned toward the window, the fields blurred behind a veil of fine rain. "He carried a pocket watch. Many gentlemen do. Yes. She closed her eyes briefly. I do not know why I noticed it. She did not yet possess enough knowledge to name suspicion. The movement could be anywhere. A watch in Conrad's pocket proved nothing, yet the way he had covered it remained with her. The carriage struck a rut. Phoebe braced herself, but the sudden jolt sent a sharp fear through her, not of injury, but of the movement hidden somewhere beyond reach. Her father's careful work might already have been broken apart, sold, or altered beyond recognition. The thought left her breathless. Benedict did not take her hand. He turned his palm upward on the seat between them and waited. The gesture asked, rather than claimed. Phoebe looked at him. His expression held no command, only an offer of steadiness. After a moment, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed gently around hers. Mrs. Bell turned her attention to the rain-streaked window. The road remained rough, and Benedict did not release Phoebe when the carriage steadied. He held her hand through the next bend, warm and firm, without drawing her closer or asking anything in return. Phoebe allowed herself the comfort. She also remembered the truth she had spoken in the estate office. Protection could not replace courage. Still, for the remainder of the road, she did not let go. By the afternoon of the 27th of October, the glass house at Lindcourt Hall had been transformed into a place of artificial summer. Orange trees stood beneath panes silvered by the cold. Ribbons in cream and blue hung between iron columns. Tables crowded with preserves, embroidered purses, carved toys, and subscription books formed neat aisles beneath the palms. Outside, the Hampshire sky pressed low and grey. Inside, county families moved through warmed air and congratulated themselves upon generosity to the servants' benevolent fund. Phoebe carried a silver tray of tea through the gathering in her plain housemaid's uniform. Her right forefinger had healed to a faint red line. No bandage remained. The injury had nearly vanished. The accusation had not. Wherever she passed, conversation thinned. Ladies glanced at her apron, as if expecting stolen gold to appear from its folds. Gentlemen, who had once overlooked her, now watched, with curiosity sharpened by scandal. Mrs. Rook had insisted that Phoebe serve in the glass house, because changing her duties, she said, would suggest guilt. Lady Adelaide had approved the decision with such sweetness that Phoebe understood its purpose at once. They wanted her visible. They wanted every whisper to find its mark. At the far end of the glass house, Benedict stood beside the Marquess of Cottersham and two peers newly arrived from London. His expression was controlled, his posture formal. He had not withdrawn the inquiry. He had also not resolved it. The sealed locket case, the remaining chain, and the planted fragment remained in his dispatch box. Mrs. Rook's blue steel nippers were still secured separately. Nell's statement had been recorded. Lord Conrad's offer had been witnessed in part by Mr. Hale, yet no single fact proved who had removed the missing watch movement. Phoebe knew Benedict felt the weight of that absence. She also knew society cared less for proof than for confidence. Lady Adelaide possessed confidence in abundance. Miss Mercer. Adelaide's voice rose just enough to stop nearby conversation. She stood beside the main subscription table in pale amber silk, one gloved hand resting upon an open ledger. Mrs. Rook waited 2 steps behind her. Several guests turned. Phoebe halted with the tray balanced before her. "My lady, come here, please." It was not a request. Phoebe crossed the space between them. The room seemed to contract with every step. Adelaide looked toward the women gathered around the table. "I had hoped this unpleasant matter might remain within the household. Unfortunately, Silence has encouraged a most distorted account. Benedict turned at the sound of her voice. The Marquess said something low, but he did not answer. Adelaide continued, Mrs. Rook has endured suspicion because she attempted to recover the late Duchess's property discreetly. She deserves the opportunity to speak. Mrs. Rook lowered her eyes with practiced humility. I wanted only to protect the house, my lady. Phoebe felt the tray grow heavier. From whom? Adelaide looked at her as though surprised by the interruption. From you, Miss Mercer. A murmur moved through the glass house. Mrs. Rook folded her hands. 3 nights before the locket was reported missing, Mercer asked me whether such a piece could be sold privately. I thought little of it then. Phoebe stared at her. That is false. On the evening of the theft, Mrs. Rook continued, she placed the locket in my hand and begged me to find a buyer before anyone discovered it missing. I carried it at once to Lady Adelaide. You carried it inside her fan, Phoebe said, because you hid the transfer from everyone present. Adelaide gave a small, regretful sigh. You see how she twists every act of duty. Mrs. Rook had just recovered stolen property from a desperate servant. She concealed it only to prevent a scene. The scene had already begun. My apron had already been searched. Because part of the chain was found upon you. The Countess of Belgrave stood near the subscription ledger, watching with open interest. Lord Conrad leaned against an iron column, his heavy pocket watch chain visible against his waistcoat. The Marquess remained beside Benedict, his face stern with paternal injury. Mrs. Rook said, Mercer told me the locket could fetch enough to leave service. When I refused to help her, she became frightened and forced it upon me. Phoebe's pulse beat hard in her throat. The lie had been prepared with care. It explained the transfer Benedict had witnessed. It turned concealment into loyalty. It made Phoebe's refusal to leave Lindcourt appear calculated, perhaps even insolent. Why did you not tell His Grace this in the servants' hall? Phoebe asked. I was shaken. You were composed enough to order my room searched. Mrs. Rook's mouth tightened. Adelaide stepped forward. Must we permit a maid to interrogate the housekeeper before the entire county? Phoebe looked toward Benedict. He had crossed half the glass house and now stood beyond the nearest table. His eyes met hers. She saw anger there. She also saw calculation. He was measuring what could be proved, what might be lost, and how many lives had become entangled with one woman's name. Guests turned toward him, waiting for ducal certainty. Phoebe understood that if he spoke now, the room would accept whatever shape he gave the truth. Your Grace, Adelaide said, this public unpleasantness can end if you confirm that Mrs. Rook acted under the pressure of recovering your property. Benedict looked at the housekeeper. Did Miss Mercer place the locket directly in your hand? She did, Your Grace. And you told no one until now. I feared she would deny it. She denied the theft before the locket appeared. Mrs. Rook faltered. Only for an instant, but Phoebe saw it. So did Benedict. Yet doubt was not proof. Adelaide lifted her chin. The household cannot continue while a servant makes accusations against her superiors and benefits from your personal concern. The words changed the air. Several guests looked from Benedict to Phoebe. Compaction became suspicion. Protection became favoritism. Every careful act between them was dragged into the open and given an uglier meaning. Phoebe set the silver tray upon the nearest table before her hands could betray her. Then answer one question. Adelaide's brows rose. You are hardly in a position to demand answers. Phoebe did not look at her. She looked at Mrs. Rook. Why would a thief place the stolen locket in the hand of the woman who summoned the search? Silence fell so completely that condensation could be heard sliding from the glass panes. Mrs. Rook stared at her. Because you had lost your nerve. Then why carry it into the servants' hall instead of taking it to Mr. Pritchard before the search began? I had no time. You had time to hide it inside a lady's fan. A whisper moved near the orange trees. Phoebe felt the story shift, not collapse, not yet, but shift enough for doubt to turn in another direction. She looked to Benedict again. This was the moment. Not when every screw and chain link had been matched, not when no risk remained. Now, while her name still stood alone before people eager to condemn it. Benedict's face was grave. This matter will be handled privately. The word struck harder than accusation. Adelaide's shoulders eased. The Marquess exhaled. Mrs. Rook lowered her gaze to conceal relief. Phoebe heard only what Benedict had asked her to endure, more waiting, more silence, more public shame contained for the comfort of those above her. Privately, she repeated. Benedict stepped toward her. Until the evidence is complete. The accusation was not private. I know, Your Grace. You know it happened. That is not the same as standing where it happened. Pain crossed his face, quickly mastered. Phoebe. It was the first time he had used her given name before others. The intimacy of it only deepened the injury. She reached up and untied the narrow strings of her white housemaid's cap. The room watched as she removed it, folded it once, and placed it upon the charity table beside the subscription ledger. Mrs. Rook went still. What do you think you are doing? Leaving service. Benedict's voice lowered. You need not decide this here. This is precisely where I must decide it. Phoebe faced him with her hands empty at her sides. I will not remain in a house where my innocence is defended in studies and sacrificed in public rooms. I can arrange lodging where you will be protected. By your favor? She shook her head. Then they will say, I left the servants' floor for the Duke's protection, because I earned it by some private means. I will not trade one stain for another. Adelaide looked almost triumphant, but Phoebe refused to give her the satisfaction of notice. My aunt lives in Bloomsbury, she said. I will go to her. Benedict stood very still. Your wages will be paid in full. Pritchard will provide an accurate reference. Thank you, Your Grace, but I am not leaving because you permit it. Their eyes held. The warmth of his hand in the carriage seemed impossibly distant now. I am leaving because I choose not to become invisible again. No one stopped her as she walked from the glass house. That evening, Mr. Pritchard returned her cap with the rest of her effects. But Phoebe folded it into the bottom of her trunk and did not put it on again. A place had been reserved for her on the morning train from Winchester. Before dawn, she would leave Lindcourt Hall with her name still unproved. Her employment gone, and the first free decision of her life entirely her own. The train left Winchester beneath a grey morning sky on the 28th October, carrying Phoebe Mercer away from Lindcourt Hall before the servants' breakfast bell had finished ringing. Her trunk stood in the luggage van, with the folded housemaid's cap buried at the bottom beneath two plain gowns, a wool shawl, and the few books that had belonged to her father. In the compartment beside her, a widow slept behind a black veil, while a clerk read the same newspaper column 3 times without turning the page. Phoebe sat near the window and watched damp fields pass in long, blurred bands of green and brown. She had left with her wages, an accurate reference promised by Mr. Pritchard, and no public clearing of her name. That last absence travelled with her more faithfully than any piece of luggage. By the time the train reached London, smoke had swallowed the horizon. Mrs. Miriam Keene waited at the station in a dark plum bonnet, small, straight-backed, and visibly prepared to disapprove of anyone who had injured her niece. She embraced Phoebe before asking a single question. The kindness nearly undid her. "You're thinner," Mrs. Keene said as they entered a hired cab. "I am not." "Then Lindcourt taught your face to look tired." Phoebe tried to smile. That may be true. Her aunt's Bloomsbury house stood on a respectable street of narrow brick fronts, neither fashionable nor poor. The sitting room smelled of beeswax, coal smoke, and the lemon cakes Mrs. Keene baked whenever anxiety made her industrious. Phoebe slept badly the first night. On the second morning, she called upon a registry office recommended by Mr. Pritchard. The woman behind the desk read his written character, then folded it with careful fingers. "This is favorable," she said. "But there have been inquiries." Phoebe's stomach tightened. "From whom?" "No names were given. Only a warning that you left a ducal household during an unresolved matter involving jewelry." "I did not steal anything. I am not accusing you." The woman's tone was not unkind. That made the rejection worse. Households dislike uncertainty. A lady who accepts you must explain why she ignored it. Phoebe left without giving her name for another position. By the afternoon of the 30th of October, Mrs. Keene had heard enough to declare that no niece of hers would beg at doors where gossip arrived first. "You may remain here as long as you need," she said, setting down the teapot with force. "I have 2 spare rooms and one very stubborn conscience. I do not want to become a burden. Then dust the parlor twice a week and spare me the tragedy of imagining it is charity." Phoebe laughed despite herself. The sound felt unfamiliar, as though it belonged to a woman she had left behind before the glass house. A knock came at the front door. Mrs. Keene frowned. "I am expecting no one." The maid returned with a card upon a tray. Mrs. Keene read it, and her face hardened. "Lord Conrad Mordaunt." Phoebe's pulse changed. "He knows I am here, apparently." Her aunt looked toward the hall. "I can send him away." Phoebe remembered his bank draft, the hidden threat in his voice, and the heavy gold watch he had covered with his hand. "No, let him in. I will remain. I expected nothing else." Conrad entered with the confidence of a man certain that a small London sitting room could not diminish him. His coat was cut for society rather than travel, and his gloves were pale enough to show that he had not walked far. The gold chain of his pocket watch curved across his waistcoat. Phoebe noticed it at once. She did not know why the sight made her shoulders tense. "Miss Mercer," he said, "Mrs. Keene." Her aunt did not invite him to sit until he had done so without permission. Phoebe remained near the mantel. "You have come a long way to repeat yourself, my lord." Conrad smiled. "You mistake concern for persistence." "I heard neither in the carriage court. You heard an offer made before circumstances became worse." He glanced around the modest room. "I understand the registry has been cautious." Mrs. Keene's hand tightened around the teapot handle. "You understand a great deal about conversations you were not present to hear. London is efficient with information." Conrad looked back at Phoebe. "No respectable household will employ a woman associated with theft from a duchess, Mr. Pritchard's reference cannot erase the question." "Then why are you here?" "Because the previous offer remains available." He drew no paper this time. He did not need to. £200, enough for quiet independence. "You need only cease making claims about my sister and Mrs. Rook." Claims supported by what His Grace witnessed. The Duke witnessed an object change hands. He did not witness you give it to the housekeeper. He did not witness my sister instruct anyone to conceal it. You are building a scandal from an angle in a polished pan. Phoebe held his gaze. And you are very anxious to stop me. His expression cooled. I am anxious to prevent a foolish woman from ruining herself. That concern arrived late. Conrad stood. Pride is admirable only when one can afford it. He reached for his hat. The movement pulled his waistcoat chain taut. His fingers slipped inside his coat and closed around the heavy pocket watch. At that precise moment, a clock in the hall struck the quarter hour. Conrad glanced toward the sound and pressed the catch of his watch. Perhaps from habit, perhaps from vanity, the inner mechanism answered. 3 clear notes sounded in order. The 4th came after the smallest delay, softer than the others, as though it had taken a breath before speaking. Phoebe stopped breathing. She was 16 again in her father's workshop, listening from the back room while Thomas Mercer adjusted a tiny hammer beneath the lamplight. 3 notes, then the softened 4th. Again, until she could recognize the difference through a closed door. Conrad snapped the watch shut. You seem unwell. Phoebe forced her hands to remain loose at her sides. I am tired. Then make the sensible choice. I already have. He studied her, but she let no recognition enter her face. She could not accuse him yet. A familiar sound was not enough before magistrates, peers, or society. The movement had to be opened. The swallow engraving had to be found. The screw pattern had to match the empty locket case secured in Benedict's dispatch box. Conrad believed he had frightened her into silence. She needed him to continue believing it. I will consider what you said, she told him. Mrs. Keene turned sharply toward her, but Phoebe did not look away from Conrad. Satisfaction softened his mouth. At last, he placed his hat beneath one arm. Send your answer through Cottersham House. I will send nothing until I have decided. Do not wait too long. He bowed and left. The front door closed. Mrs. Keene rose at once. You will not take that man's money. No. Phoebe crossed to the window and watched Conrad descend the steps. His hand remained over the watch beneath his coat, but I needed him to believe I might. Her aunt came beside her. What happened? Phoebe touched the brass loop hidden beneath her collar. Her father's voice seemed near enough to hear. Listen before you look. A damaged mechanism often tells the truth aloud. The missing movement is inside Lord Conrad's pocket watch. Mrs. Keene stared at her. You are certain? I recognize the chime. My father altered it for the late Duchess. Phoebe turned from the window. Fear remained, but it no longer ruled the room. Recognition is not proof. We need someone who knew my father's work and can identify the mechanism itself. Who? Josiah Flint. He was my father's apprentice before he opened his own workshop in Clerkenwell. Mrs. Keene reached for her bonnet. Then we shall go tomorrow. Phoebe looked toward the closed door through which Conrad had departed. He had come to show her how powerless she had become. Instead, he had carried the truth into her aunt's sitting room and allowed it to speak. Benedict Somerley had reached London on the 29th of October, one day after Phoebe left Hampshire, but he did not force an audience upon her. He sent no command through Norcombe House, no carriage to collect her, and no message phrased as concern while carrying the weight of a duke's expectation. On the morning of the 31 October, his calling card arrived at Mrs. Miriam Keene's house in Bloomsbury with a single written request beneath his name. May I call at 11 if Miss Mercer is willing to receive me? Phoebe read the line twice. The restraint in it unsettled her more than authority would have done. Authority could be resisted. Courtesy required an answer from the part of her that still remembered his hand open, upon the carriage seat, waiting for hers. Mrs. Keene watched from beside the breakfast table. You are not obliged to receive him. I know. And you are not obliged to forgive him because he has discovered polite handwriting. Phoebe almost smiled. I know that as well. She looked down at the card. Benedict had followed her to London, yet he had allowed her the dignity of refusing the door. I will see him. Then I will remain in the room. I hoped you would. At 11 precisely, Benedict was shown into the sitting room. He wore a dark morning coat and carried no hat after the maid took it in the hall. London had placed a faint weariness beneath his eyes, but nothing in his posture asked for sympathy. Mrs. Keene occupied the chair nearest the tea table. Phoebe sat opposite her, dressed in a plain brown gown that belonged to her rather than to Lindcourt Hall. Benedict bowed to both women. Mrs. Keene, Miss Mercer. Your Grace, Mrs. Keene replied. Her tone made clear that ducal rank would not shorten the distance to forgiveness. Phoebe indicated a chair. Please sit. He did, but he did not begin with the inquiry. I owe you an apology. Phoebe's fingers tightened around the folded handkerchief in her lap. Benedict continued before she could protect him from the words. He had come to say, at the glass house, I allowed you to stand publicly alone. After I had privately accepted that the evidence against you was false and arranged. I told myself I was preserving the inquiry. In truth, I was preserving my political options. Mrs. Keene's expression did not soften, but she listened. You lacked proof of who removed the movement, Phoebe said. I lacked complete proof, Benedict answered. I did not lack knowledge of what my silence would cost you. I had already seen Mrs. Rook conceal the locket in Lady Adelaide's fan. I knew the chain had been cut. I knew your duties had been altered to place you near the cabinet. I knew Conrad had offered you money to leave, yet when the accusation was repeated before the county, I chose delay, because delay was safer for me. His voice remained controlled, though the admission strained that control. I called it caution. You were right. It was not neutral. Phoebe had imagined this apology during the train journey. In some versions, Benedict defended himself with Parliament, factory children, and the responsibilities of rank. In others, he asked her to understand before he fully named what he had done. He did neither. The absence of excuse made anger harder to hold in its old shape. Why did you come to London? She asked. To tell you that before asking anything else. And after that, to ask whether I may help repair the damage I allowed. Phoebe looked at him carefully. Repair my reputation or return me to your household. Your position at Lindcourt is yours if you ever choose it, but I will not ask you to return to service. That decision ceased to belong to me when you laid down your cap. The answer reached a place inside her that protection alone never had. He had understood the meaning of her departure, not rebellion, not wounded pride, choice. Mrs. Keene poured tea, then left every cup untouched. Phoebe has something to tell you, she said. Benedict turned toward her. Phoebe drew a breath. Lord Conrad came here yesterday. His stillness sharpened. Here, he repeated his offer. £200 in silence. Was Mrs. Keene present throughout? Did he threaten you? He reminded me that no respectable house would employ a suspected thief. Then he made a mistake. Benedict waited. Phoebe touched the brass loop beneath the neckline of her gown. He opened his pocket watch when the hall clock struck the quarter hour. Its movement sounded 3 notes, in order, then a softer 4th note, after a slight delay. Recognition entered Benedict's face. Your father's alteration. I believe so. Believe I know the sound. I do not yet have physical proof that the movement inside his watch is the one removed from the locket. Benedict leaned forward. Where is Conrad now? Presumably at Cottersham House. I can require him to produce the watch. Can you? Phoebe asked. Or can you ask another gentleman to surrender private property because a former maid recognized a chime? The question stopped him. He understood at once. A duke's authority could compel servants. It could influence peers. It could not transform suspicion into proof without consequence. You are right, he said. If he refuses, he will claim insult. If I seize it, he will claim persecution. Adelaide will say, my judgment has been corrupted by personal interest. Mrs. Keene's brows lifted slightly at the last words, but she said nothing. Phoebe held Benedict's gaze. There is a man who may help. Josiah Flint. He was my father's apprentice, and now keeps a workshop in Clerkenwell. He may recognize the movement if we can establish more than the sound. We will go to him. The old command entered Benedict's voice before he checked himself. He paused. Forgive me. May I provide a carriage and accompany you, if you wish it? Phoebe noticed the correction. So did Mrs. Keene. My aunt will accompany us. Of course. Benedict sat back, but the tension in him remained. There is another matter. Phoebe knew what it was before he spoke. The Marquis, yes, Cottersham, believes the alliance can still be preserved if I end the inquiry and treat Conrad's offer as a misunderstanding. And if the movement is inside Conrad's watch, then the alliance ends. His answer came too quickly to be calculated. Phoebe searched his face. Even if the factory measure fails, yes. Even if the northern peers withdraw and society says you destroyed reform over the word of a servant, yes. Even if Adelaide claims I manipulated you, Benedict did not look away. Yes. The room became very quiet. Phoebe had not asked because she wanted sacrifice offered at her feet. She needed to know whether truth would remain truth when it pointed toward people Benedict required. Why? She asked. Because a reform, built upon knowingly abandoning one innocent woman, would teach me nothing about justice. Because children in factories do not become safer if I accept cruelty in my own house as the price of helping them, and because I will not ask you to trust a man who retreats whenever truth becomes inconvenient. Something in Phoebe's chest loosened, not completely. Trust did not return in a single sentence, yet for the first time since the glass house, she could imagine it returning at all. Benedict's hands rested upon his knees, controlled and empty. May I support your investigation? He asked. Not direct it, not remove it from you. Support it. Phoebe glanced at Mrs. Keene. Her aunt gave no instruction, only the freedom to decide. Phoebe looked back at Benedict. You may. Relief crossed his face before discipline concealed it. He extended one hand, palm upward, exactly as he had in the carriage. He did not reach across the distance without permission. Phoebe placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady. He held her hand without drawing her forward. I was afraid you would never receive me, he said. The confession was quieter than his apology. I have spent years surrounded by people who speak according to what they want from my title. You were the first person who told me the truth, when it could cost you everything. At the glass house, I proved I had not yet learned to deserve that truth. Phoebe felt his thumb rest lightly against the side of her hand. You are learning now. I am afraid it may be too late. She could have comforted him. She could also have punished him by leaving the fear unanswered. Instead, she chose honesty. It is not too late. It is only not finished. Benedict bowed his head once, accepting both hope and limit. He did not release her until she gently withdrew her hand. A knock sounded from the hall. Mrs. Keene's maid entered, carrying a card smudged faintly with workshop soot. Phoebe recognized the name before her aunt read it aloud. Mr. Josiah Flint. Beneath it, in a firm tradesman's hand, was a short reply to Phoebe's message. Mrs. Keene passed it to her. Phoebe read the sentence, then looked at Benedict. He says he can identify my father's movement without any written ledger. On the 2nd of November, the locked dispatch box from Lindcourt Hall stood upon the long table in Benedict's library at Norcombe House, Mayfair. Mr. Pritchard had accompanied it from Hampshire, had kept the key in sight from the moment Benedict removed it from his inner coat pocket, and had recorded the hour when the sealed envelope containing the gold locket case was taken out. The remaining chain and the fragment found in Phoebe's apron stayed inside their separate seals. Nothing else was disturbed. Josiah Flint stood beneath the library lamps, with his spectacles low upon his nose and Phoebe's father's brass loop resting beside his own tools. He was a broad, silver-haired man, whose hands had become thick with age, but remained precise when they touched metal. Mrs. Miriam Keene sat near the open door, her presence satisfying propriety, and her expression warning everyone that she would tolerate neither evasion nor condescension. Phoebe stood opposite Josiah. Benedict remained at the head of the table, watching the watchmaker study what remained of his mother's locket. Josiah did not speak for several minutes. He turned the empty case beneath the light, examined the 3 screw holes, and ran one thumbnail lightly around the dark inner wear. Then he looked up. Thomas worked on this. Phoebe had expected the words. Hearing them still tightened her throat. "You're certain?" she asked. I held the movement while he adjusted the quarter hammer. Josiah pointed with a slender probe. "These 3 screw positions aren't standard. Your father shifted the retaining points because the original brace had warped. See this uneven wear near the lower edge that came from the replacement housing he shaped by hand?" Benedict leaned closer without touching the case. Could another watchmaker have made the same alterations? Another watchmaker could imitate them after seeing the work. He couldn't produce 12 years of wear in the same places. Josiah turned the case again. "The movement that belongs here will bear a swallow on the balance bridge. Thomas marked it himself after the late Duchess asked how she could know the same mechanism had been returned." "And the chime?" Benedict asked. Soft 4th beat, fractionally late. Josiah tapped the table 4 times. The first 3 came evenly. The 4th followed after a pause so slight that an untrained listener might have missed it. Thomas reduced the final hammer's force and altered the release. He complained for a week that noble ladies expected time itself to become courteous. Phoebe's mouth almost curved. He was pleased when it worked. He was insufferably pleased. For one brief moment, grief became memory rather than pain. Then Josiah's face sobered. "If Miss Mercer heard that cadence in Lord Conrad's watch, you have reason to suspect the movement is inside it. But sound alone will not satisfy a magistrate. The watch must be opened, the swallow, screw pattern, and adapted fit must be seen." Benedict looked toward the sealed case. "Conrad will not submit willingly." "Then make vanity do what conscience won't," Josiah said. The opportunity came that afternoon. Benedict had arranged for a newly acquired French mantel clock to be placed in the blue drawing room, a gilt and ebony piece with an exposed escapement designed to interest any man who fancied himself knowledgeable about mechanisms. Lord Conrad arrived with Lady Adelaide shortly after 3, both accepting Benedict's invitation because refusal would have suggested fear. Mrs. Keene sat beside Phoebe near the windows. Josiah stood by the clock as a tradesman formally retained to inspect it. The doors remained open, and Benedict's secretary occupied a writing table in the adjoining room. Nothing about the meeting could honestly be called clandestine. Conrad approached the French clock with immediate interest. "A handsome object," he said, though the French often sacrifice accuracy to display. Josiah gave a mild nod. "Some do, my lord. This escapement is poorly balanced." "Is it?" Conrad glanced at him, annoyed by the question. "I have studied watches since I was a boy." Adelaide removed one glove finger by finger. "My brother has always had an unusual gift for delicate mechanisms." Phoebe watched the heavy gold chain across Conrad's waistcoat. The pocket watch itself remained concealed. Benedict stood beside the mantel. "Then perhaps you can settle a disagreement. Mr. Flint believes this clock loses time because the balance is too light. I believe the fault lies in the regulating spring." Conrad smiled. "You are both overlooking the simplest answer." He took out his pocket watch. "One must compare the beat against a properly adjusted movement." Phoebe felt every muscle in her body become still. Conrad pressed the catch and held the open watch near the French clock. The room listened. 3 notes sounded in clear succession. The 4th arrived after the smallest delay, softer than the rest. Josiah's eyes lifted to Phoebe's. Recognition passed between them. He had heard it. Benedict had heard it too, though he did not yet possess the memory that made the sound conclusive. "An elegant alteration," Josiah said. "Not common." Conrad closed the watch. "A private improvement." "Made by whom?" Phoebe asked. Adelaide turned toward her. "Surely this consultation doesn't require Miss Mercer to question my brother." Conrad's gaze sharpened. "The maker is of no concern." Benedict stepped away from the mantel. "It is now." Conrad slipped the watch back into his pocket. "I don't understand you, Mr. Flint has identified the cadence as an alteration made by Thomas Mercer to my mother's watch movement. I am asking you to allow him to inspect your watch." Silence filled the drawing room. Adelaide's face changed first, not with surprise, with calculation. Phoebe saw it and knew Benedict did as well. Conrad laughed once. "You are asking me to surrender private property because a former maid claims she recognizes a chime. I am asking you to permit a brief examination in the presence of witnesses. And if I refuse, then your refusal will be recorded with the rest." Conrad's expression hardened. "This has gone beyond absurdity. You have allowed personal interest to corrupt your judgment, Norcom." Benedict did not move. "Be precise. You defend this woman in your house. You follow her to London. You bring tradesmen into your drawing room and insult a gentleman's honor because she has learned how to hold your attention." Phoebe felt the insult strike, but she did not look away. Adelaide rose. "My brother is right. Miss Mercer's story changes whenever one version fails. First, the housekeeper framed her. Then the locket was dismantled. Now Conrad's watch conveniently contains the missing mechanism. The movement was already missing when His Grace opened the case." Phoebe said. "That fact hasn't changed." "Nor has your ambition," Adelaide replied. "Perhaps theft was never the true object. Perhaps proximity to a duke was." Mrs. Keene came to her feet, but Phoebe lifted one hand. She would answer for herself. "If I wanted money, your brother offered me £200. Conrad's color deepened. "That is a lie." Mrs. Keene heard the second offer. "Mr. Hale witnessed the end of the first. And now you hope to force marriage by manufacturing scandal." The cruelty in Adelaide's voice was calm, almost bored. Phoebe understood then that opening Conrad's watch in this room would not be enough. Even if Benedict ordered it, even if Josiah found the swallow, The Mordaunts would say the evidence had been mishandled, the witnesses chosen, the Duke compromised by desire. Truth needed the same audience that had heard the lie. She turned to Benedict. "Do not compel him here." Conrad looked relieved too quickly. Phoebe continued. "Let the examination take place at Lindcourt Hall before the original witnesses, the servants who saw the accusation, the guests who heard Mrs. Rook's account, Mr. Pritchard, Nell Finch, Mr. Hale, the Marquess, and an independent solicitor should all be present." Adelaide stared at her. "You presume a great deal. No, I am refusing another private solution." Phoebe looked only at Benedict. "The locket case can remain sealed until then. Lord Conrad may keep his watch upon his person. Mr. Flint can open it before everyone, if Lord Conrad still wishes to clear his name." Benedict's expression held something deeper than approval, respect, perhaps, and the recognition that she had chosen the ground upon which justice would stand. "Agreed," he said. Conrad's hand closed over the watch inside his coat. "I agree to nothing." Benedict turned to him, "Then refuse before the county." After the Mordaunts had gone, Benedict returned to the library alone. He sat at the escritoire, took out a sheet bearing the Somerley crest, and wrote to the Marquess of Cottisham. He did not ask for further cooperation. He did not bargain for the factory measure. Before the watch had been opened, and before the inquiry had been won, he ended the political alliance in his own hand. On the 4th of November, the Marquess of Cottisham came to Norcombe House before noon and demanded that Benedict cancel the examination at Lindcourt Hall. He was shown into the library, where the sealed dispatch box remained under Mr. Pritchard's supervision, though none of its contents had been disturbed since Josiah Flint examined the empty locket case. The Marquess refused the chair offered to him. He stood before the fireplace, with both hands locked behind his back, his face composed in the manner of a man accustomed to making anger appear dignified. "This has gone far enough," he said. "You have humiliated my daughter, insulted my son, and ended an alliance over the recollection of a former servant." Benedict remained behind the escritoire. "I ended the alliance because you asked me to suppress an inquiry involving theft, false accusation, and an attempt to purchase silence. Conrad offered assistance to a woman in reduced circumstances. He offered money on condition that she leave and cease speaking, according to her. According to Miss Mercer, Mrs. Keene, and the coachman who witnessed part of the first exchange." The Marquess's mouth hardened. "You are prepared to destroy a factory measure for this? No. You are prepared to withdraw support for it to protect your children from scrutiny." The answer landed cleanly. Cottisham looked toward the dispatch box. "You do not yet know what is inside Conrad's watch?" "No. Then this entire spectacle may end with nothing. If it does, the evidence will have been tested openly, and if it does not," Benedict's expression became still, "then your son will answer for what he has done." The Marquess stepped closer. "Cancel the gathering. Conduct the examination privately. I will send Conrad abroad for a time, and Adelaide will resign from the charity committee. The girl's wages may be doubled. Give her a settlement if that is what she wants." Benedict rose. "Her name was damaged before servants and county society. It will be restored before the same witnesses." "You speak as though she stands equal to us." "In this matter, the truth she tells is equal to yours." Cottisham's restraint broke at last. Political usefulness cannot survive such sentimental folly. Political usefulness cannot purchase immunity. Benedict rang for his secretary. "The examination will proceed on the 7th November. The Marquess left without bowing. The door had scarcely closed before Benedict began issuing instructions. Mr. Pritchard would return to Lindcourt with the dispatch box and maintain the same witness record used in London. Nell Finch would be placed under Mrs. Bell's direct supervision until the gathering ended. Mr. Hale's statement would be taken again in the presence of an independent solicitor. Josiah Flint would travel with his tools in a separate case and would inspect no object until the witnesses assembled. Mrs. Rook's blue steel nippers would remain wrapped and secured under the butler's authority. Lady Adelaide and Lord Conrad would be invited formally, not summoned as servants. The Marquess would receive the same notice. Benedict arranged 2 carriages for the witnesses who preferred the road and railway accommodation for those travelling through Winchester. He provided funds for meals and lodging without making any witness dependent upon his household after the inquiry. When Phoebe arrived at Norcombe House with Mrs. Keene that afternoon, Benedict handed her the draft order of presentation. She read the first page, then looked up. "You have placed your own account first. I witnessed the transfer. Yes, but if you speak before the physical evidence, Adelaide will say the room follows you because you are a duke." Benedict considered that. "Where would you place me?" "After Nell and Mr. Hale, before Mr. Flint opens the watch." He took the paper back and altered the order without argument. "Anything else?" "The chain fragment should remain sealed until the locket case is produced. The nippers should be shown afterward, not before. Otherwise, Mrs. Rook may claim everyone was encouraged to see a match." "Agreed." Phoebe's gaze moved over the arrangements. "You have thought of nearly everything." "Nearly is not enough." He opened a second folder. "Your wages from Lindcourt have been paid in full through the date of your resignation. Mr. Pritchard has prepared an accurate reference, stating that you left voluntarily while the accusation remained unresolved, and that no theft was proved against you." Phoebe read it. The language did not conceal the scandal, but neither did it place blame upon her. "This does not require me to return. Nothing I offer will require that. And if the inquiry fails, the reference remains, the wages remain, your choice remains." She folded the paper carefully. "Thank you." Benedict looked at her. "You should not have needed gratitude for what was already owed." Mrs. Keene, who had been listening near the doorway, announced that she wished to speak with Benedict's housekeeper about the next day's departure. She moved into the adjoining morning room, leaving the conservatory doors open between the 2 spaces. Phoebe followed Benedict beneath the glass roof where late autumn light faded among potted laurels and winter roses. The house remained occupied. Mrs. Keene's voice could be heard beyond the open doors. Even so, the distance between Phoebe and Benedict felt more private than any closed room. He stopped beside a stone bench. "There is something I must say before Lindcourt." Phoebe held the reference against her skirt. "About the inquiry. About you." His control did not vanish, but she saw the effort it required. "I have spent years believing that affection was safest when it remained unspoken. Duty could be measured. Strategy could be revised. Love seemed less reliable." He looked toward the dim glass above them. "Then you stood in my servants' hall with blood on your hand and refused to surrender your dignity. You told me the truth when silence would have been easier. You left my house rather than let my protection become another cage." His gaze returned to hers. "I love you." The words were quiet. They altered everything. Phoebe's breath caught, but Benedict did not move closer. "I am not saying this to earn forgiveness," he continued. Love does not excuse what I did at the glass house. It does not erase the fact that I allowed you to bear public shame while I preserved my options. I am saying it because you should know the truth before we stand in that hall again." Phoebe had imagined tenderness from him as something restrained, offered in fragments. She had not imagined this clarity. "I love the man who came to Bloomsbury and named what he had done," she said. "Not the Duke who believed rank made silence harmless." Pain crossed his face, but he accepted it. "That is fair. I am not finished." Phoebe stepped closer. "I love the man who changed the order of evidence, because I asked. The man who ended an alliance before he knew whether the truth would reward him. The man who is learning that standing beside someone is not the same as standing over her." Benedict's breath left him slowly. "Phoebe." She lifted her hand and touched his face first. Her palm rested against the line of his cheek. He closed his eyes for one heartbeat, and when he opened them, the restraint in his expression had become vulnerability. He did not reach for her until she moved nearer. Then his arms came around her with careful strength. Phoebe returned the embrace, resting her cheek against his chest while his hand settled between her shoulders. There was no command in it, no rescue, only relief, grief, and the quiet recognition that neither of them stood alone in that moment. When they drew apart, Benedict kept his hands lightly at her arms. "May I kiss you?" Phoebe looked into his face and found no expectation there, only hope and the freedom to refuse. "Yes." He bent toward her slowly. The kiss was gentle at first, almost reverent, then deepened with the emotion both had restrained for too long. Phoebe touched his cheek again and freely answered him. Nothing in it demanded a promise she had not made. Nothing in it erased the work ahead. When they separated, Benedict rested his forehead briefly against hers. "I love you," he said again. "And I love you," Phoebe answered. Then she stepped back enough to make the next truth clear. "This is not consent to marriage. I know. The reckoning at Lindcourt must stand upon evidence, not upon what we feel. It will, and afterward I will choose what future I want." Benedict took her hand and pressed it once between both of his. "That choice will remain yours." On the 6th of November, they travelled south with Mrs. Keene, Josiah Flint, and the solicitor, when Lindcourt Hall came into view beneath the darkening sky. Carriages already lined the forecourt. Lord Conrad Mordaunt stood at the top of the steps beside his sister, one hand resting over the heavy pocket watch beneath his coat. On the 7th November, the great hall of Lindcourt Hall held no music, no flowers, and no arrangement designed to soften what was about to occur. The long tables had been moved aside. Chairs stood in ordered rows for the house party guests, senior servants, charity committee members, the Marquess of Cottersham, Mrs. Miriam Keene, Josiah Flint, and Mr. Arthur Bellamy, the independent solicitor Benedict had summoned from Winchester. At the center of the hall stood a single oak table beneath the ancestral portraits. Mr. Pritchard placed Benedict's locked dispatch box upon it, then set beside it the separately wrapped blue steel nippers taken from Mrs. Rook's work-basket. Lord Conrad Mordaunt remained near his father, with one hand pressed over the heavy watch inside his coat. Lady Adelaide sat rigidly beside the Marquess, her face composed and colourless. Mrs. Rook stood under Mrs. Bell's supervision, no longer dressed with the unquestioned authority she had once carried through the servants' passages. Phoebe entered with Mrs. Keene and took her place beside the evidence table. She wore a plain dark blue gown, not a housemaid's uniform. The absence of her cap seemed to trouble the room more than its presence ever had. Benedict stood before the assembled witnesses. This matter was made public in my household and repeated before county society, he said. It will not be resolved behind a closed drawing-room door. Adelaide's mouth tightened. Benedict continued, before any evidence is heard, I must correct my own conduct. At the Glasshouse Bazaar, Miss Mercer was publicly accused. I had reason to know the accusation was false in its central claim. Yet I chose to delay full public action because I wished to preserve a political alliance. I allowed her to bear the cost of my caution. That was wrong. No one moved. Phoebe had known the apology would come. Hearing it before the same county families who had watched her fold her cap upon the charity table carried a force she had not prepared for. Benedict looked directly at her. Miss Mercer, I am sorry. Phoebe held his gaze. Thank you, Your Grace. He stepped aside. The order of presentation belongs to Miss Mercer. The whisper that moved through the hall died when Phoebe placed both hands upon the edge of the table. I will begin with what was known before the locket was recovered, she said. My duties were changed on the evening of the 15th of October, so that I would enter the morning room. Mrs. Rook made that change. Later, part of the locket's chain was found in my apron. The locket itself was not found upon me. She turned toward Nell Finch. The young scullery maid rose from a chair near Mrs. Bell. Her face was pale, but her voice held. After midnight, I saw Mrs. Rook by the silver cupboard. She had blue steel nippers in her hand. When she heard me, she put them in her pocket. Did you see a chain? Mr. Bellamy asked. No, sir. I didn't see what she cut. Did anyone instruct you to say otherwise? No. Nell sat. Mr. Hale stood next. The head coachman described Lord Conrad's approach in the carriage court and the folded paper in his hand. I couldn't hear every word, he said, but I heard Miss Mercer refuse money. I saw his lordship put the paper away. I also saw him cover the watch at his waistcoat when she looked toward it. Conrad gave a contemptuous laugh, a coachman interpreting gestures. The Marquess said, Conrad, be silent. Benedict then gave his account. He described the servants' hall, the polished warming pan, Mrs. Rook's hand beneath the shelter of Adelaide's fan, and the locket appearing where no honest recovery required concealment. Adelaide rose halfway from her chair. Mrs. Rook had just brought it to me. Then there was no reason to hide the transfer, Phoebe said. Adelaide sat again. Mr. Pritchard unlocked the dispatch box with Benedict's key under the solicitor's eye. He removed the sealed envelope containing the gold enamel locket case and placed it before Phoebe. The seals were unbroken. The remaining chain and the fragment found in her apron followed in their separate envelopes. Mr. Bellamy read the labels and recorded the time. Only then were the papers opened. Phoebe used her father's brass loop to examine the severed ends. Josiah did not touch them. The fragment fits the missing section, she said. Mr. Bellamy leaned close while Mr. Pritchard held the pieces steady. The cut aligned, the curve, width, and tiny flaw in the link matched. Phoebe then indicated the wrapped nippers. Mr. Pritchard opened them. The jaws are crescent-shaped, she said. One edge bears a small nick. The same irregular impression appears on the chain. Mrs. Rook's breathing changed. Benedict did not look at her. This establishes how the fragment was cut, Phoebe continued. It does not yet establish who removed the watch movement. Her refusal to claim more than the evidence allowed stilled the room more effectively than accusation would have done. She looked toward Conrad. That requires the watch in Lord Conrad's possession. Conrad remained seated. I will not submit my property to a tradesman's theatre. Josiah Flint folded his hands behind his back. Then perhaps your lordship can explain why your watch sounds with Thomas Mercer's altered quarter chime. Many watches chime, not like that one. Conrad's father turned toward him. Open it. Father, if this is slander, end it. Conrad's eyes moved from the Marquess to Benedict, then to Phoebe. You have arranged the room against me. Phoebe answered, The room was arranged against me first. I am asking only that the mechanism be seen. The Marquess's voice hardened. Give Mr. Flint the watch. For one long moment, Conrad did not move. Then he drew the heavy gold watch from his waistcoat and placed it upon the table. Josiah waited until Mr. Bellamy confirmed the transfer. He opened the outer case with a small tool from his own box, removed the back plate, and lifted the mechanism into the light. A tiny swallow was engraved upon the balance bridge. Phoebe heard Mrs. Keene's breath catch beside her. Josiah turned the movement so the witnesses could see. Thomas Mercer's mark. He placed the empty locket case beside it. The screw positions correspond. The wear around the lower edge matches the replacement housing. Thomas shaped 12 years ago. He pointed to a thin metal ring surrounding the movement. This adapter was filed recently, so the smaller mechanism could sit inside Lord Conrad's larger watch case. Conrad's face had gone grey. Adelaide gripped the arms of her chair. That proves only that Conrad acquired an old movement, she said. It proves nothing about Miss Mercer. Mrs. Rook made a broken sound. Every head turned toward her. It was his lordship, she said. Adelaide rose. Be quiet. Mrs. Rook looked at Phoebe, then at Benedict. Years of authority seemed to leave her all at once. Lord Conrad removed the movement the night before the search. He knew enough to open the case. Lady Adelaide said the empty locket could be returned once Mercer was blamed. Adelaide's voice sharpened. You're lying to save yourself. You told me no one would believe a maid over your family. Mrs. Rook's eyes filled, though no one moved to comfort her. I cut the chain. I put the piece in Mercer's apron. I gave the empty case to Lady Adelaide in the servants' hall because she said His Grace would never challenge her publicly. The Marquess closed his eyes. Why? Benedict asked. Conrad stared at the floor. Mrs. Rook answered for him. Gaming debts. He meant to sell the movement through a collector who wouldn't ask where it came from. Lady Adelaide feared the debt would expose the Mordaunt accounts before the season. Adelaide stood very straight. I protected my family. Phoebe looked at her. By destroying mine. Adelaide's composure fractured. You were a servant. I expected the matter to end there. The words settled over the hall with greater condemnation than any confession. Benedict stepped beside Phoebe. Not before her, beside her. Miss Mercer's rank never made her truth smaller, he said. The Marquess rose slowly. Adelaide will resign every charitable position she holds. She will no longer represent my household in society. Full restitution will be made to Lindcourt's Servants' Fund. He looked at Conrad with an expression stripped of protection. My son will answer before the magistrates. Benedict said, Mrs. Rook will also be referred. I will not suppress proceedings for the sake of any alliance. Mr. Pritchard approached Phoebe after the solicitor had secured the movement, the outer watch case, the chain, and the nippers as evidence. Miss Mercer, he said, your former position remains open should you wish to return. Phoebe looked around the hall where she had once moved unseen at the edge of other people's lives. Thank you, Mr. Pritchard, but I will never again earn safety by becoming invisible. A murmur moved through the servants, not of pity this time, but recognition when the hall had emptied and the evidence had passed into the solicitor's custody. Benedict remained near the long table. He did not reach for Phoebe until she stepped toward him. Then he opened his arms and waited. She entered the embrace by her own choice. His hands settled carefully at her back. "May I call upon you tomorrow?" he asked. "Not as your employer, as a man asking for courtship." Phoebe drew back enough to see his face. "Yes," she said. Tomorrow. By May 1859, the scandal at Lindcourt Hall had become a cautionary story repeated in drawing rooms by people who preferred to speak of justice only after it was safe. Lord Conrad Mordaunt had been convicted of theft and fraud. Mrs. Elspeth Rooke, whose confession had helped establish the full sequence of events, received a reduced sentence, though she never returned to service. Lady Adelaide withdrew from society after losing every charitable position she had once used as proof of virtue. The Marquess of Cottisham paid restitution to the Servants' Benevolent Fund and ceased defending his children in public. Benedict did not celebrate any of it. Phoebe understood why. Justice was necessary, but it was not beautiful. It restored what could be restored and left the rest to memory. 6 months had passed since the Great Hall inquiry. 6 months in which Benedict had courted her openly and without concealment. He came to Mrs. Keene's house in Bloomsbury at proper hours. He walked with Phoebe beneath her aunt's supervision in Russell Square. He invited her to Norcombe House when other guests were present, and accepted every awkward silence from those who did not know how to receive a former housemaid as a woman courted by a duke. Some families refused invitations that included her. Others arrived out of curiosity and left uncertain, because Phoebe neither apologized for her past nor performed gratitude for their acceptance. Benedict never demanded that society welcome her. He simply refused to treat its hesitation as a judgment worth obeying. When he proposed, he did not kneel before an audience or offer rank as rescue. He asked in Mrs. Keene's small sitting room, where the clock upon the mantel kept ordinary time and the winter fire had burned low. "I love you," he said. "I want a life in which your choices remain yours, even when they differ from mine. Will you marry me?" Phoebe had answered only after reading the marriage settlement. Benedict had insisted upon that. The document preserved her personal property, guaranteed independent funds under her control, and gave her sole authority over the vocational foundation she had begun planning with Josiah Flint. "You're very thorough," she told him after signing. "I have learned that affection without structure can still become a cage, and structure without affection, an estate office." She laughed, and he kissed her hand with the solemnity of a vow already being practiced. They married quietly after the banns were read, with Mrs. Keene, Mr. Pritchard, Mrs. Bell, Nell Finch, Josiah Flint, and a small number of friends present. Phoebe entered the chapel as Phoebe Mercer and left as the Duchess of Norcombe, but the title did not erase the woman who had once carried tea through the glass house, while county society weighed her innocence. She kept her father's brass loop beneath the silk of her wedding gown. Benedict noticed it only when she placed her hand in his. He smiled and said nothing. By late spring, a narrow brick building near Clerkenwell had been cleaned, repaired, and fitted with long workbenches beneath north-facing windows. The sign above the door read Mercer and Flint Precision Works. Benedict had suggested adding the Norcombe crest. Phoebe had refused. "The women who come here should know the work belongs to skill, not patronage." "Then the crest stays away," he said. The atelier accepted widows, tradesmen's daughters, and women whose families had taught them to sew delicately, but never imagined those hands could shape springs, polish gears, or assemble instruments. They were paid for training. They were paid more when their work became skilled. Josiah Flint directed the technical instruction, though he complained loudly that Phoebe corrected his records and reorganized his tools. "Your father was easier to manage," he told her. "My father never managed you at all." That is an uncharitable interpretation. It is also accurate. Benedict visited often enough to know each apprentice by name, but he never described the place as his gift. When newspapers praised the Duke of Norcombe for supporting women's work, he returned the proofs with a note insisting that the design, management, and purpose belonged to the Duchess. One editor removed the correction. Benedict withdrew every future advertisement from the paper. Phoebe discovered what he had done 2 weeks later. "You needn't fight every foolish sentence written about me," she said. "No," he replied, "only the ones that steal your work while congratulating me for it." On a clear afternoon in May, Josiah sent word that the late Duchess's watch locket was ready. The original movement had remained under legal custody until the proceedings ended. After its release, Benedict delivered it to Josiah in the presence of Mr. Bellamy, who recorded the transfer. The gold outer case, the repaired chain, and the movement were reunited for the first time since the theft. Nothing had been replaced except the damaged inner brace and the adapter scars left by Conrad's alteration. Josiah preserved every mark that did not interfere with function. A restored object shouldn't pretend nothing happened, he said. Phoebe stood at the central workbench while afternoon light fell across the instruments. Benedict waited beside her, one hand resting lightly against the edge of the table. Josiah placed the locket upon a square of dark blue velvet. The enamel flowers had been cleaned but not repainted. The gold bore faint scratches from years of use. Phoebe lifted her father's loop and examined the hinge, the retaining ring, and the movement beneath the opened cover. The tiny swallow remained on the balance bridge, no larger than a grain of rice. The screw positions matched the old wear inside the case. The restored chain lay coiled beside it, the repaired link visible only if one knew where to look. "The final hammer?" Phoebe asked. Josiah folded his arms. "Listen." He wound the mechanism, then pressed the release. 3 clear notes sounded. The 4th followed a fraction later, softened exactly as Thomas Mercer had designed it 12 years before. Phoebe closed her eyes. For one instant, she heard the Clerkenwell workshop of her childhood. She heard her father clearing his throat over the bench. She heard herself at 16, pretending not to listen while waiting for the delayed 4th note. When she opened her eyes, Benedict was watching her, not the locket. "Does it sound as you remember?" he asked. Phoebe looked down at the watch resting in her palm. The ticking was steady and small, yet it seemed to fill the entire room. "It sounds different." Concern touched his face. "Is something wrong?" "No." She covered the locket gently with her fingers. "It no longer measures the hours I was required to endure alone." Benedict's expression changed with the quiet force of love, still new enough to astonish him. He placed his hand beneath hers, supporting the weight without taking it. "I love you," he said. The apprentices at the far bench lowered their eyes with badly concealed smiles. Josiah became extremely interested in a drawer of screws. Phoebe did not care. "And I love you," she answered. "Not for making me a duchess. I know. For learning to stand where the truth required you." His thumb moved once across the side of her hand. "You taught me where that was." "No, I only refused to stand there alone." Benedict bent and kissed her forehead, then her lips, gently and without hurry. Phoebe freely leaned into him, one hand still holding the restored locket between them. When they drew apart, Josiah cleared his throat with theatrical impatience. If their graces have finished delaying the workday, the apprentices are waiting. Phoebe smiled. Then we should not keep them. She turned toward the long room of bright tools, concentrated faces, and women being paid to learn what others had once denied them. Benedict remained beside her, not ahead of her. In her palm, the locket continued to tick. 4 measured beats marked the quarter hour. The last arrived softly, a breath behind the others, and this time nothing was missing.